and welcome to episode number 54 of the Knitting Teaspoon podcast. I'm Liesbeth, your host, and this is a podcast which is all about knitting, sewing, spinning, weaving as of late, apparently. Thank you so much for joining me. It really means a lot that you take some time out of your day and spend it with me. So, thank you. A quick reminder, this will probably be the last podcast episode for a while, and I'm not really sure how long this hiatus is going to last, but next week on Friday I will have some abdominal surgery, and I'm just not sure how soon I will recover after that, and I don't think that I will be able to get a podcast out before then, because I've kind of planned a lot of things for next week, because next week is kind of the last week that I know for sure that I will be feeling kind of as I feel now. The surgery is supposed to help me get rid of some recurring abdominal pain, so I might suffer from that by then. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but it's likely that I won't feel as good after the surgery, and I'm just not sure how long it's going to take to recover. So bear that in mind. So let's get right into the regular content of a podcast episode. So today I'm wearing my Françoise dress. This is a dress that I made about a year ago. It's a pattern by Tilly and the Buttons. I'm aware that you can't really see my bottom half, but I can't really stand up and show you because I'm sitting on a bar stool to get a nice backdrop. So I can't really go and do acrobatics here, but I may try to insert a picture. I'm not sure if my boyfriend will be able to take one later today, because I don't think I have one of this dress. This dress, although I made it about a year ago, has had some modifications recently, because I never really liked wearing this dress for two reasons. One, it's a bit short and the sleeves are a bit tight, and because the sleeves are a bit tight, it also means that once you move up your arms, you kind of lift up all the fabric of the dress, and I feel like if I don't lift up my arms, it's already quite a short dress. It comes to, say maybe 3 inches above the knee or something like that. And if I move my arms, then it depends on how much fabric I move up, how much it grows, and I'm not really comfortable with wearing such short dresses. Even though I'm wearing quite non-transparent ties underneath them, I just feel it's a bit awkward. Anyway, so the other reason that I did not like wearing this dress, and that was a more important one actually, is that this has a kind of lining underneath the collar bit of this dress, and I don't know what I did wrong, but for some reason it would always kind of curl out in ways that I did not expect it to, or it just wouldn't stay in a position that I wanted it to stay in. But after I got back from Scotland, I don't know why this happened to me, but I suddenly had this idea, I want to wear this dress, possibly because a lot of my clothes were in the laundry, because we had no access to laundry services on our holiday. I took this dress out of my drawer and stitched it a bit, the flap that was going all kinds of directions down a bit. So I stitched it down in all of the seams. So for the sleeve, there's a seam here, there's a sleeve, there's a seam right on top of the shoulder, and there's one to the back, and obviously the same on the other side. The dress is kind of symmetrical in the sense of the pattern, at least. The mice on it, they obviously are not, but the pattern itself is. And I also stitched it down in the middle of the center. I'm not sure if you can see that. If you look up very closely, you may be able to see it. There's like this tiny line of stitching somewhere here. Can't really point at it because I can't really see it when I look down, because it's so close to my neck, but I know it's there, and I know it's visible. That is slightly visible, because I tried of course to use a thread that matched the color of the dress quite good, although you can kind of see it on the sleeve seams. It's not 100% matching, but I feel like that's very difficult to achieve with any kind of fabric to have yarn that exactly matches it, or thread maybe for sewing. I'm not sure. So it's not a lot of sewing, but there has been a little bit. Anyway, so let's get into what I've been doing this week, because this actually happened 2 weeks ago, but that episode was already so long that I did not mention this. Well, first up, I think we have spinning, because that's, I think, the first thing that I finished this week. And I think last week I showed that I had 2 finished plies. I'm not sure if I had both finished by then, but I'd spun from a bed, and I spun a double ply, or a double drafted, but it was actually 4 double drafted ply. And now I 2-plied them together, and it looks like this now, and I'm really happy with that. One of the plies, the one from the bat, was significantly longer than the other one. That might be because the bat weighed about 55 grams, and the combination of the roving for the rest weighed about 50 grams. But I think the majority is just because I spun it way thinner than the other bit. So I also plied the remainder of the bat spun yarn, and I chain plied it. And I'm not a pro at chain plying, but I have tried a bit before, and I thought it's a nice way to practice the technique. So yeah, here you can see it. It just kind of looks like a 3-ply actually, because it actually is a 3-ply, but made out of one single. So yeah, I quite like how this turned out. This is such a tiny bit that I'm really not sure what I can do with it. I could probably need a swatch out of it, and that's about it probably. Anyway, but yeah, these were, as you can see, they are still on the bobbin, so they were made on my spinning wheel. And I did drop spindle a little bit this week, but really not enough to mention. I think I may just have picked up this drop spindle just before I started podcasting, because when I was all ready and had my lights and everything turned on, then my upstairs neighbors, they decided to vacuum clean their house. And well, it's perfectly legit, of course, to do that, but it was a bit annoying, and I didn't want those kinds of background noises to be on the podcast, so I decided to wait a little. And while I waited, I went spinning on my drop spindle. So I feel like my drop spindle is really a kind of project for short moments. So I kind of pick up a bit of fluff, and I will spin that tiny bit all at one go, which is typically about 5 to 10 minutes maybe, and that's it. I drop it down a few times. It's typically enough to drop the spindle down a few times, and then you need to wind it on. And because you always need to make these tiny pauses in your drop spinning anyway, because you need to wind on the length of yarn that you've just spun, it makes it really easy to put it down again. And I feel like that's less the case when you're spinning behind a wheel, because there's kind of this continuous motion, so that kind of keeps you going as long as you still have some roving or something in your hands. But that might just be me. I don't know. It also means that there's really no better time to pause than any other, so you could just pause anyway. Anyway, so that's one bit out of the way. Then there has been a weaving project, but I really did not make a lot of progress on this one. The rainbow belt 2 weekends ago, on my dad's birthday, I showed it to my sister, and she liked it, and she said, oh, this would make a nice handle for a bag, and I would like it if you replace the blue with a black, and then just make me some belt. And I said, okay, I can make you some belt, and I started it, but I obviously did not finish it, so this is kind of what it looks like while it's in progress. So the yarn is warped through here. You can see that there's the orange, the green and the purple on top now, and if I flip this over, you will see that the other 3 colors are underneath here. There's a lot of bits and pieces laying around. That's just for me to make it easy to weave with this thing. The belt is looking pretty much the same as the belt that I've been weaving before, so yeah, it's getting there. It's becoming pretty, and I am a bit annoyed though with the yarn. I think in the yellow yarn I ran into 2 knots already, and really I've only warped like twice a distance of, well, what would it be through my living room? Maybe 4 meters, so 8 meters times 2 would be something like 16 meters, and already 2 knots. So not too impressed with that. And also in this black yarn I came across a knot. This black yarn is actually from another brand, so all the colors are Scheepjes Laura, and this black yarn, beats me. I think it's Lana Grossa, and I'm not really sure. I think it's called Katone, and it's just black. My local yarn shop did not have black, or at least not in stock, when I went to pick up yarn for this project, so obviously I did not buy black because I couldn't. So yeah, but I do have some black now, and I'm weaving with it, and it's slow progress. There's actually a bit longer that I've rolled up on this empty sewing bobbin. So that's from Gütermann threads, which is a brand that I use a lot for sewing. Yeah, but the information on it is not really relevant. I just needed an empty one, and I've rolled up a bit. You can see that it's, well, thick, or getting thicker. There's a few layers of belt already wrapped around it, but it's going to be a lot more. Anyway, so that's it. I kind of need to keep this project here because it's still attached to a pole of this kind of cabinet shelf kind of thing behind me here. Is there a general word for something that includes like wardrobes, drawers, bookcases, or shelves? Well, shelves as in as part of a cabinet, maybe. I'm not sure if there's a general word in English. In Dutch there is, and I've been looking for this word. I'm not sure. So if you are a native English speaker, you may just know what kind of word I'm looking for. Like a desk is a type of table, but a side table is also a type of table. Is there a general word for the category of things that include bookcases and wardrobes and drawers? In Dutch there is, and I'm not sure if there's an English word for this. So you can really help me learn English today. Also by saying there is no such word. I'm not sure. So then I've been working on my sock as well, and I have not put in a progress keeper, or at least not where I was last week, because I did put one in, as I tend to do, because I count rows, as I've mentioned before, and I think this one marked the point where I had 50 rows done, something like that. Not really sure anymore. Doesn't really matter anymore anyway. So yeah, here's my sock. I've finished knitting the heel and the heel flap and everything, and it's just stockinette in the round, and it's gorgeous, lovely yarn. I really like this yarn, and if it weren't for the price, I would buy me a whole lot more of it. But it's good to treat yourself with little bits sometimes as well. This is House of Alamode house fingering in the Twin Peaks colorway. And then there is another project that I've already been working on last week, and it has continued to grow a bit. And this is my fishy sock, and this is still the one that I had done the trick on the heel with, and the first one, so, or rather the second one, because I had knit one to about this point before, and then it turned out that I could not fit in. This one fits, so yeah, I'm quite happy with the progress, and I've knit substantially more on it this week because I'm just happy that it's about to get finished. As in, I know now that it fits. The most important bit of the fit is around here. Then it's nice if it increase is enough for my ankles. I don't have pretty and slim ankles. Mine are quite substantial. So yeah, I need to increase for that. And I also need to keep in mind that these pattern repeats don't all have the same stitch count, which would have been nice if I had thought of that before I started knitting on it, because I thought I have 60 stitches, so I just need to make sure that every pattern repeat is, you can divide it by something to make it fit on 60 stitches, but yeah, that doesn't work for all the way up the leg. So it's interesting where I have to do the increases now, but it will work. So that's the progress on my fishy socks. And this yarn, by the way, is Lang Jawoll. And now I have another project which is also out of Lang Jawoll solid yarn, and it comes with a reinforcement yarn, but I don't need it. And I've made a swatch for this project, and here it is. It's a very tightly knit. I need to knit on size 1.5 millimeter or US 000s to achieve this gauge, but I really like the look of this fabric, and my boyfriend has actually asked me to knit him a pullover, a very basic one. So I just made this little swatch. At the bottom I thought, let's try knitting with the 2 millimeter needle, and then I knit a bit on the machine. So I'm actually intending to knit this project partially on the machine, which is why I can do such a tight gauge, because knitting an entire sweater for him in at such a tiny gauge, that would probably take me a year or something like that. I don't know. So I thought I can just make the front and the back side of the sweater, like from the bottom to up under the armhole. I can knit that on the machine, and I just need to make sure that I have needles with which I can hand knit the part from here upwards. And so that turned out to be US 000 or 1.5 millimeter needles, and I'm happy to knit at that gauge for him, because I really like the way the fabric is turning out. And apart from the swatch, I've also cast on and knit a ribbing, and as you can see, this is still on regular hand knitting needles, because my machine, well, I do have a ribber. I have no idea how to use that thing. So my mom said, but you have the instruction manual, but the instruction manual is actually only for the basic thing and not for the extension bit that is the ribber, and I really just don't know how to use it. And also it just makes 1x1 rib, I think, and I don't want 1x1 rib, I want 2x2 rib. So yeah, I measured one of his pullovers that he likes to wear, but he's running out of them, and some of them are getting holes in them, and most of them are too short. So my boyfriend has this very annoying problem that he's too tall for his width. So either he wears sweaters that he kind of draws in because they are too wide for him, or they are too short for him. And especially with laundry, they can sometimes even grow even shorter, and then it gets really annoying. So I find this very frustrating, because I kind of have the opposite problem. Garments are typically too long for me if I need to fit in them width-wise. But yeah, and my boyfriend is one of those lucky people who never has to watch his weight. Anyway, so I intend to, after the ribbing, attach this to my knitting machine and knit a majority of the body on it. And I measured on one of his pullovers that he typically has a ribbing bit on the bottom of 5 or 5.5 centimeters, which is 2 or slightly over 2 inches. And yeah, I want to just kind of mimic this. I did run into one tiny bit of a problem with my project, because I had made this swatch and I completely fell in love with the gauge and how it looked, and I thought, I want this. I want it exactly like this. Turns out, if I want to make a front panel for him for a sweater, I would need somewhere close to 200 stitches, for just the front side of a sweater for him, and same for the back. I just measured like the width of one of his pullovers because they fit width-wise, they fit perfectly, but length-wise they are a bit on the short side. And I only have 164 stitches on my knitting machine, so that's the maximum that it can go. And you could theoretically knit a few stitches which are just on a needle next to it, but I feel that would get very tricky, and then it's probably not even faster anymore doing it on a knitting machine than knitting it by hand. So yeah, I'm not really sure how that's going to turn out. So I decided that instead of having just a plain stockinette stitch sweater, I would just have to knit some side panels as well, which I can either knit on the machine or maybe just knit by hand. Probably some ribbing detail or something, I don't know. I'm kind of in the process of designing this sweater as I go. I have no clue how I'm going to knit it all together. I am hoping that I can figure out how to do the increases for the sleeves on the machine, because, well, a bodice piece for a man who does not have any requirements for like the female waist shaping is quite straight, so that should be easily doable on the machine. But sleeves, they tend to have like this kind of shape, also for men. So I kind of need to figure out how I can increase on the machine, or I don't think it will be much faster if I need to put everything on the machine and take it off again. I can afford to do that for like a bodice piece. Like once I finish the ribbing, I will definitely put in a lifeline afterward, after finishing everything by hand, and then put it on the machine once and then just knit like, I don't know, something like 40 centimeters or something. I will need to measure my boyfriend again to figure out exactly how long the body needs to be, but I feel like then it's worth it, because you're making such a length of fabric that way, to put it on a machine and take the effort to take it off again. But it's really tedious actually. So the knitting itself goes a lot faster, but everything around it just takes a lot more time. Anyway, so yeah, this project is out of the Jawoll yarn, and I actually have a shade card of this yarn. I didn't purchase it, but my local yarn shop, they got a new card of this yarn, a new shade card, because there were some colors added to the collection, and maybe there were a few removed, but I think there were mostly additions to their selection. And my local yarn shopkeeper, she usually gives these shade cards to her granddaughters if they're no longer useful, but I was around and I asked if I could have it, and I have one now, so my boyfriend can pick his colors for pullovers from home. I've also figured out that if I want to make a sweater with 164 stitches maximum, that I would need to knit on 2.25mm needles, or US ones, for the body, which is doable, and I might do that for another sweater. But I had already knit this swatch, so partially hand knit and then put it on the machine and then machine knit, and then a few rows on the top of this are actually hand knit, but even though they are still in stockinette stitch, because I wanted to test if I could get the same gauge, or at least close enough of a gauge, to the machine knit bit, which I did. So I feel confident that I can continue knitting this at some point. But I just like this gauge so much that I wanted to make one sweater like this and just see how it goes with the panels on the side of the body, and see how it goes from there. And if it turns out to be terrible, I can always still rip back and try to knit it on a looser gauge. And I feel like it's likely that some of his future pullovers are going to be knit at a slightly looser gauge than this one, even though I love it. So there's one new acquisition in my stash, and that's because last week I showed that I got a new set of high-highs. I do have a set of high-highs as well, but I purchased the Jawoll needles, a set last week. But I was right, there is no US 2.5 or 3 millimeter needle in that set. So I went to the website of the stall and I managed to get hold of this set of tips. And I'm really happy that it's more easily available now in the Netherlands, this Jawoll needles, because it was really hard to get by last year. I wanted to quickly mention this blanket this week because I have actually washed it for the first time and it's not really a happy story. So first of all, it got really heavy, so I needed to shift the position of the blanket all the time because I had to hang it over my clothesline because there wasn't a way that I could make like 4 square meters of space for this blanket to dry, so more than 4 square yards. Yeah, I don't have that kind of space to have something that is soaking wet dry, but I knew that this might happen when I started knitting this blanket, and the blue yarn bled like crazy in the bathtub. So I just put a tiny layer of water in my bathtub and put the blanket in there with a lot of vinegar to hope that the yarn would soak up as much of excess dye as possible, but it did not quite do the trick. So there are some white spots that have turned slightly blue. So yeah, I'm not too thrilled about that, but on the other hand, I kind of knew that it would happen and I like blue, so it's not terrible. Here's also another bit that you might be able to see a smidge of blue here throughout the white bit. It's not terrible, but I would have liked it not to happen. And I actually knit a pair of high socks with out of the exact same yarn. So I had a blue lace bit and a white and red colorwork section, just a tiny band close to the toes and one close to the cuffs, and the white is kind of bluish green almost now. So I knew that this might happen, and it actually did happen. And I think it happened also because I had these socks, they kind of had 2 different dye lots, and because of the colorwork section in between, I could use one dye lot for the length of the socks and then another dye lot for just the toes and cuffs. That way I could get the socks entirely out of the 2 skeins that I initially had out of the same dye lot, and then had to use a 3rd skein for the toes and cuffs. But at least one of those dye lots, it just keeps on bleeding. Even now, I think I've washed them at least some 10 times maybe. It still keeps bleeding, so I don't know. It possibly will get a lot worse in the future. So I've purchased some color catchers and I hope that that will solve the trick in the future. But that's always a bit that's difficult about very pretty blue yarns and sometimes also red yarns. They have a tendency to bleed a lot more than other colors. Blacks can be quite bad as well. I feel like yellows are typically not that much of a problem, and blues and blacks are possibly worst. I don't know. It's just sad, but it happened. And I still love my blanket. And it's grown a bit. It's definitely wider now, although I haven't measured it yet. Doesn't really matter how big it is. It fits a 2-person sized bed, so it's a full blanket and I love it. Anyway, so that was really all that I had to share with you. So thank you again for joining me, and I hope you guys have a lovely time. I usually say a lovely week, but well, I won't see you next week and I don't know when I will see you again. So well, I hope you will notice when I get back. So if you aren't already, you can subscribe and click the alarm bell, which should be somewhere on that side, I guess, if I'm correct in which way this happens. So you can subscribe on YouTube, and you can put on the alarm bell, and then that way you will get notified if I upload something else. And since now I'm going to take a bit of a longer break than usual, probably that might be a handy tool. But most of you guys may already be subscribed, I don't know. Anyway, so I hope to see you again soon. Let's just say soon.